Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Okay. This year, we're going to spend $75 billion on IT security, according to Gartner. Security is one of the fastest growing markets with all of IT. Some analysts say that security spending is going to grow this year 8 to 10%. That means next year we're going to spend over $80 billion on security. But the reality is that the growth rate of breaches, hacks, the cost is actually growing faster than the amount that we're actually investing in security. A report came out this morning from Forrester, said that 2/3 of all enterprises, and this is based on confidential interviews with hundreds of CISOs, that 2/3 of organizations have been breached at least 5 times over the last 2 years. We've had, just last year, 1 billion identities have been stolen from various websites, applications, etc. And every hour, 165,000 records are stolen. So what we're doing is not working. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again and hoping for different results. It's not happening. So in my 20 minutes here, I'm going to posit that I think we need to rethink security, rethink our priorities in terms of what we're doing. So for years, we've relied on this concept of perimeter security to protect our assets. In fact, of the $75 billion, that's where the vast majority of the spend is going. But the reality of the situation is the world's becoming deperimeterized. 90% of organizations use the cloud in some manner. There's 150,000 different websites, mobile apps, SaaS applications, etc., that are used by enterprises. And now we have an environment in which there are over 8 billion mobile devices in use. Another analyst said that over 40% of the workforce today is mobile. They're not tethered to a desk. Okay? And we have the promise in the next few years of 30 billion Internet of Things devices. That does not include the actual mobile devices that you see, the 8 billion growing to 9, 10 in the next few years. So we've moved to a world in which there historically has been a perimeter to a new dimension where there's no perimeter at all that we're dealing with. Today's security is not secure. As you can see over the last few years, we've had a history hacked with consequences. Consequences for consumers, 1 billion Yahoo accounts breached. That merger, the actual monetary amount of the merger is going to be significantly impacted because of this revelation. And it turns out that the SEC now believes that a breach is a material thing to announce, or it's material impact. And so Yahoo, because they did not reveal the size and scope of the breach, could face some significant SEC fines. So if any of you are practitioners at a public company and you are aware of a breach, it probably has to actually be known, just like your company missing its quarterly numbers. We have a history hacked with consequences for governments and civilians. A nation state targeted 7,000 individuals. And heads of political parties were phished. One in particular got an email, said, your account is being accessed from someone in the Ukraine. Click here. He went to a URL, had his picture. He reset his password. He did not have multi-factor authentication. He sent an email to his IT person and say, is this a legitimate email? And the person replied back, yes, it's legitimate. It was a typo. He meant to say illegitimate. I, as CEO of a 500-person company, I get every 2 or 3 days a phishing attack directed at me. People in my organization on a weekly basis get emails from Tom Kemp asking to wire money or asking for W-2s. That's called CEO fraud. So another bit of advice, besides what I said if you're a security practitioner at a public company, is that if someone emails you about a security issue, pick up the phone and call that person. I tell everyone in my organization, if you get an email from me asking for money, W-2s, et cetera, pick up the phone and call me. Because too often we rely on technology. Because we have an identity problem in terms of people phishing and stealing, but we also have people impersonating others. And so you don't actually have to deliver any malware. You can actually get someone to do something on your behalf. Speaking of identity problems, the year before, the Office of Personnel Management was breached. 20 million records of people, very personal information of people applying for security clearance. It had all your information about your family, your relatives, your financials. It had 4 million biometric records associated with the 20 million records. That was because, that breach was caused because of A, lack of strong authentication. OPM had not yet implemented PIV card support, so much like Podesta and MFA, no strong authentication. And the second reason was privileged accounts were misused by the bad guys. And we're also hacked with consequences for enterprises. A major DNS provider was taken down, and a bunch of enterprises were impacted. Maybe even your company was impacted because of this. What happened was there a botnet took over thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Internet of Things devices that had a default password associated with them. As I said before, 2/3 of enterprises have been breached at least 5 times. But the breaches are not just in one area. They're equally going after servers, networks, endpoints, applications, on-prem, cloud, etc. So there is no sweet spot in which people are getting breached. It's equally spread out across all parts of your infrastructure. And the cost is projected to be over $2 trillion associated with these breaches. So what's the problem? The problem is that the vast majority, and this sounds really simple, but people don't think about it. The vast majority of this new dimension is accessed by one single permission, the password. This is Verizon last year. They said 2/3 of all breaches involved stolen credentials, 2/3. Forrester, last year, when they did their analysis of breaches, said 80% of breaches involve the misuse of privileged credentials, the super users, the root, the admin accounts. We have a problem of too many passwords and too much privilege. The breaches, if 2/3 to 80% is focused and involves too many passwords, too much privilege, that is now what the bad guys have figured out. That's the leading attack vector. It's your users. It's their passwords. It's the privileges that you have set up. So in a world which is increasingly becoming deperimeterized, so the underlying infrastructure is changing, and we're glad we're here at the Cloud Security Alliance to talk about the changes as people shift to SaaS and infrastructure as a service, you also need to take into account that the attack vector has completely shifted as well. And so I'm going to posit to you that you need to get your Identity Act together before you worry about other aspects of security. Okay? Because most of the money is being spent on stuff, next-gen this, next-gen that, to focus on the endpoints, the infrastructure, and the applications. In fact, only $5 billion of the $75 billion is spent on identity, but 2/3 to 80% of the attacks now are identity-related. So in a world in which you and I are going to the Starbucks across the street, using our mobile device, talking to Salesforce, talking to Google Apps, Office 365, we don't have antivirus on our device. We're not VPNing into the corporate network. We're not using a next-generation firewall. So in that environment, what can and should you secure? You need to secure the user. Is it really Tom Kemp? Should you not leverage the biometrics that are built into the device so I don't actually have to type a password with someone right next to me? Should we not actually have an analysis of my behavior and say, well, wait a minute, 5 minutes ago, Tom was in New York accessing Google Apps. He can't be in San Francisco at the same time. And this is important because we're now in a world in which our enterprises are comprised of scattered, millions and millions of scattered connections across infinite space. Now, you may say, okay, Tom, focus on identity. That's great, great advice, etc. But can you actually prove by focusing more on identity that there will be a material impact on my business? And so I'm going to tell you the answer is yes. Because that same Forrester report that I quoted interviewed hundreds of enterprises. And there was Group A and Group B. Group A had greater than six breaches, millions of dollars and all that stuff. Group B had half the number of breaches. What was the difference between Group A, Group B? Is that Group B had a much more mature approach and put more focus on emphasis on identity. So again, we have a problem here. The danger zone is we have too many passwords, too much privilege. Again, it's just, I'm trying to get across this. You need to have the mindset because this is where the attack vector now is. So how do you become more mature from an identity perspective? The first thing is establish identity assurance. At the most base level, that means implement multi-factor authentication everywhere, not just for your VPN, but for your email, your apps, your network, your databases, etc. People that do that, there is a dramatic difference. And then as part of that, what you want to do is reduce the number of passwords. You want to reduce the number of identities. You want to consolidate identities, move to fewer identities, give the user single sign-on, but provide more protection and more security of those sign-ons by layering not just, an SMS text when you try to do, but multi-factor authentication, which also integrates and leverages your mobile device to integrate biometrics. That technology is there. We should be using that, not only at work, but also personally as well for our emails. The second step in terms of this maturity model is we want to limit lateral movement. We want to mitigate the risk of VPNs. We want to move towards more automated provisioning. When I talk to CISOs, the one thing I hear a lot is they wish they had a "you are gone" button when someone leaves, right? Wouldn't that be great? Completely deprovision off my network, because nowadays you don't know if people have access to Drop or Box or other applications. And then the final thing is that, again, speaking as a CEO, we've implemented products like Concur, Workday, etc. And the reality is that there's a workflow associated with all those applications. I have to approve people's vacations. I have to approve purchase orders, etc. Why haven't we moved towards approval workflow for access? Do you really need to get access to that? We spend all this time approving vacations request. Oh, I'm going to take Friday off. 5 clicks, everyone gets approved. But I need the root password for our PCI server. Okay, go ahead. We're not going to ask any questions. We also want to limit, in terms of that maturity model, we want to move towards enforcing least privilege. And then finally, the final aspect of companies that have been able to decrease in half the number of breaches is that they actually audit privilege access. Capture everything. It's the security camera on your servers. Casinos have the eye in the sky. Banks have that. You put security cameras at your house, Nest cams. Why don't we put a security camera on the actual servers and applications and then do analysis from there? So yes, you can actually significantly decrease the number and extent of the breaches that you're facing by doing and addressing the new attack vector, which is too many passwords, too much privilege. You will not only see a reduction in cost, but your users will actually be more productive, which means you can more rapidly adopt new technologies. Give people single-click access to their applications, leverage SSO protocols like SAML, leverage multi-factor authentication, and your users will be more productive. You can adopt new cloud technologies a heck of a lot faster, and you can make yourself significantly more mature, and you can start reducing the number of breaches. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to challenge you to rethink your security. Is it working? Are you focusing on, we all talk about consumerization of IT. It's all about the user. But are you focusing on security of the user? Are you leveraging the power of identity and what it can give you to not only make yourself more secure, but more productive? So let's continue the conversation. My company, we're having a party. You're invited, all of you guys. So go to this URL. It's on me. Drinks and food are on me. Love to have you. It's info.centrify.com/RSA party. You'd think we would actually put a bit.ly but it could have actually led to a bad site. So this is a good site right here. Bring your RSA badge, and we'll continue the conversation. Feel free. It's at Thomas R. Kemp. I don't know how my P got knocked down right there, but look forward to further discussing this with you. Thank you very much.